Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman, Debbie Caudle here. Before we jump in, let me ask you a few questions. Have you ever tried to bring up something important in your marriage only to have the conversation become about your tone instead of the issue itself? Or maybe you've caught yourself missing the version of your marriage before you had children, and then you feel guilty for even thinking that. Maybe you've noticed that your spouse seems warmer, kinder, more engaged when around other people than with you, and you don't know how to have this conversation with them without sounding critical. Or if any of these situations sound familiar, this is this is the episode for you today. Today's episode is a Q&A, and today's questions cover 3 very real, very common scenarios that I see couples struggle with all the time. I really wanna know which one of these resonates most with you. Please tell me, drop me a comment. I read every single one. And if you have a relationship question that you want me to address in a future episode, please email me at debbie@debbiecaudle.com. Okay, let's dive in. Question number 1. Every time I bring something up, it turns into a debate about my tone. So this question comes from someone who says, I try to talk about something that matters to me, and suddenly the conversation isn't about the issue anymore. It's about how I said it, my tone, my delivery, my timing. How do I get past that? Because problems are not getting resolved. Well, I'm with you. I hear you. This is one of the most frustrating dynamics in marriage that happens far more maybe than people realize. And I have definitely experienced this myself in my first marriage. I, I, I can't even recall a single conflict where it didn't become about me, quote unquote, yelling, even though my tone had only shifted minutely. Okay. So here's something that's really, really important to understand that even back in the days of my first marriage, even as a therapist, I got really suckered into handling this in an incorrect way. Okay. I didn't even fully pay attention to this. What's really important to understand is that when a conversation shifts to being about tone, why are you yelling at me? Why are you talking to me like this? Right? What that is an indication that the listener feels threatened. It doesn't mean that you're communicating poorly. You might not be at all. You might be doing everything right. You might be saying all the right words. Your body language might be very appropriate. But because there's a little bit of energy in your tone, because maybe you went from a soft voice to a little more intense voice, then tone becomes the focus when the subject, when the content of what you're saying feels maybe a little emotionally risky or scary. Okay. So anybody who struggles with feeling easily criticized, maybe they struggle with shame. Maybe they just don't like feedback at all. So no matter how calmly you deliver it, it's going to trigger a defensive response. Okay. Why? Well, I've talked about this before in previous episodes. It's because their nervous system is already wired to hear, uh oh, I'm being judged. I'm being told I'm a failure. I'm being told I'm not enough. And once that alarm system starts to go off, the brain is looking for an escape route. So, the easiest path away from the subject itself is your tone. It becomes the distraction. Just notice how it sort of flips the script. You come to your spouse about something that he or she needs to change, or something that, is a sensitive topic that you're bringing up, and they flip it around on you. You are doing something wrong. You need to change something about you. In this case, you need to stop yelling. You need to stop sounding so threatening. You need to calm down. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that tone never matters because, of course, it does. All right. If you are somebody who tends to be very, we'll call it passionate in the way that you speak. And maybe you're someone who also likes to debate. Maybe you are very, you have a sort of more of an argumentative personality, or you're constantly negotiating everything. Then maybe there's something deeper that's going on with that. Okay, so that is something to pay attention within you. But if you know that you are really trying to be as gentle as possible, but you can't hide the fact that you're upset, nor should you have to. If you can't claim that your body language and your tone are reflecting the energy and emotion that you're feeling behind these words, that's not something that you have to change or apologize for. So the first thing you do is you call it out. But you do it gently, right? Because you now know that you're dealing with somebody who is highly sensitive. Okay. And you want to do this without making any sort of accusation. This is where curiosity becomes so critical in your tool bag. I notice, I notice that when I bring things up, I love we. The moment you take and replace you with we, you've softened everything down, okay? You've allowed your partner to hear this a little bit better. Doesn't mean they're still not gonna get defensive, but we're tweaking our language in multiple ways to get the best possible response from them. So, I noticed that when I bring things up, we end up focusing on how I said it instead of what I'm actually trying to say. And this part's also really critical. I don't think either of us wants that. Now, what are you doing when you say that? You are assuming in a positive way that your partner wants resolution and connection and reconciliation as much as you do. Always assume the best of your partner. Always jump to the best possible conclusion when it comes to your partner. When you do that, again, it softens everything that you're thinking and certainly that you're saying. The second thing you want to do is you want to anchor the conversation in intention. So, in other words, what are you trying to achieve through your words? So, you might say something like, I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm trying to feel closer to you, and I'm trying to feel understood by you. Okay. Which means you really have to kind of stop and pause and go, What am I trying to accomplish at this conversation? What am I hoping the outcome will actually be? And then trying to find the words that are going to get you as close to that outcome as possible. The third thing you want to do is when your spouse tries to derail, okay, the conversation by going, why are you yelling at me or why are you talking to me this way? Don't abandon the content entirely. It's okay to say something like, "Hey, I'm willing to soften my voice, but I really still need to talk about the actual issue here." Okay? Don't allow your partner to rabbit hole you over in another direction and then just, this is what I mean when I say, when I said earlier that I was sort of suckered into, you know, talking about something that was completely off topic, okay? Don't let yourself be suckered into doing that. You can gently say, "Right, I hear what you're saying. Can we circle back to what I actually came to talk to you about?" Now, and this isn't about you trying to win an argument. It's about helping you stay on track with the actual original conversation and not letting your partner avoid or derail because they feel uncomfortable. But try that, okay? And, if you need more help than that, you know where to find me, right? Okay, let's move on to question 2. I missed the version of our marriage before kids, and I feel guilty admitting that. Right? This question comes from someone who says, I love our children deeply, but sometimes I miss how close we were before kids and how easy things were and how much more freedom we had. Yeah. And then I feel selfish for even thinking that. Okay, well, I think virtually every couple goes through this. So you're you're not a bad person for feeling this way. This is normal, this is typical, and it doesn't mean that you don't love your children or that you love them less than you love your spouse or your marriage. I mean, it's human, right? When kids come into the picture, everything flips. Your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. And what often gets lost isn't love, but the opportunity, the margin, if we can put it that way, for what you're able to allow your marriage. And, you know, that is something to grieve, if we can use that word. A lot of couples don't really grieve that. Like, I love my kids. I love that we made the choice to have a family, but I miss us. So what do? They silence those feelings, those words. They tell themselves they should just be grateful, for having kids. But, unacknowledged grief doesn't disappear. In fact, a lot of times it can turn into something else. It can turn into resentment. It can turn into feeling a little lonely. How many times, especially do husbands feel this way because their wives have become so focused on being moms that they can be a little bit emotionally neglectful of their husband. And, another thing that can happen, of course, as a result of that is just there's more emotional distance between you and your spouse. So let's reframe this a little bit. Reframing is a really important tool when our thinking gets a little out of whack. It's not that you're longing to go back to the days when you didn't have children. You're not longing for a childless life, I hope. Uh, You're longing for greater connection with your spouse. And that's not a betrayal of your role as a parent. It's a signal that your marriage needs attention. Okay. So a healthier way for you to reframe this in your brain is I love my family, but I also miss us. And I don't want to lose that part of my life. I don't want to lose us in the process of being a great mom and a great dad. And what that does is it allows the two of you to begin discussing what to do about that. You get to move from that guilt that you hold inside to just being honest and open and transparent about this issue. Strong marriages don't ignore these things. They talk about them openly. They acknowledge them. And then they intentionally rebuild the connection within the new reality of having kids. So that might mean, hey, we can't we can't spend as much quality time together in all the same ways that we used to do things. We may not get to sleep in every morning. We might be a lot more exhausted at night than we typically were, but what can we do? What can How can we carve out time for each other? How can we prioritize our marriage in a way that acknowledges our new reality? Okay? So go back to your spouse, open up about this, and then talk about what the solutions are. Now, if you're listening and you're connecting with these questions so far, and you're realizing that parenting and stress and life transitions have pulled you into this survival mode, and you're just functioning, but again, you're not really connecting. I mean, connection is a big deal, and it's what I talk about a lot in this podcast because it's what I see over and over and over when I work with couples. They've just stopped connecting. They're living under the same roof, but they're like roommates. They may not even be sleeping in the same bedroom. And while I get that there may be some logistical reasons for that as well, overall, the reason why they're coming to me is because they don't feel like husband and wife anymore. So that's why I created Marriage in Bloom. Marriage in Bloom is a 6 month. You can take a little longer. You can do it a little faster, but basically a 6 month high touch transformative program. And I designed this to be more than just, weekly therapy sessions. You know, you're not a traditional therapist, and that's what you're gonna get. At best, you're gonna get weekly appointments, and it's gonna take you a year to 2 years to really start to unravel a lot of these issues, okay? What I've created is far, far more intense than weekly sessions, and that's what we do in the program. We teach you how to reconnect. We teach you how to rebuild partnership, whatever season you're in, with or without kids. They've grown up, they're still at home, they're toddlers, they're teenagers. It doesn't matter. If you know you need this, please reach out to me. wcaudle.com/marriage in bloom. This is a 45 to 60-minute sit down with me, totally free of charge, where we talk about where you're at, what you need, and what your next steps are. Okay, let's move on to the third and final question. Why does my spouse seem different around other people? Okay, so the question is, my spouse is warmer, more attentive, and more respectful around other people than they are with me, and it hurts, but I don't know how to bring it up without sounding accusatory. Yeah, okay, this is painful, and I do see this occasionally when I work with people. Here's what's happening underneath, okay? When we are out in public, it activates our best self. Let's stop and think about this for a moment with yourself and tell me that this isn't true. When you are around people that you don't see very often, okay, so church or social settings, people that you don't know well, even work, okay, your boss, your colleagues. Um, think about when you're on a new job or you're meeting a new client, right? It activates your best self. You're more aware of how you come across. You're more aware of how people perceive you. You're more intentional about how you show up in those spaces, aren't you? What you wear, what you what you say, okay? You're more emotionally regulated. You don't want to come across as weak or you know, too sensitive or too pushy or too aggressive. But at home, especially the longer you've been married, where you feel safe, you let your guard down. And that's what's happening with your spouse. Doesn't excuse the behavior, okay, but it does explain it. The problem here is that when when we start to feel safe around our spouse, we become emotionally neglectful. So over time, you start to feel sort of the leftovers of your spouse's attention. Other people get the best version of your spouse, and you stop feeling prioritized. Now, you might be guilty of this too, because I think there's this element in all of us. I think about myself and I think, "Huh, here's where it's true. I dress up for church. I will dress up to go out to a restaurant. I will dress up for pretty much every situation. But, there are some days of the week, like Sundays, where I don't know that I've even brushed my hair all day. I might just scrape it back into a scrunchie, certainly no makeup, definitely wearing sweats. Now, I know Jeff doesn't care, and that's sort of a mild example of what we're talking about, but think about how that plays out in multiple ways, where we begin to care more about what the outside world sees about us than we start to care about what our spouse is seeing, okay? So how do you talk about this? Again, with everything else that we've talked about here, you're not coming in with heavy-handed with an accusation. You're not saying things like, "You're so safe around other people." And that's really not gonna get you the results that you want. Again, you name what you're saying. Curiosity. I noticed. I noticed you seem more engaged around other people, and I miss that version of you at home. We used to be a certain way around each other, and I miss that. I don't see that as much, okay? What you're doing is you're reflecting, and you're inviting your spouse to be reflective instead of defensive, okay? Doesn't mean that, you have to be perfect at home. I don't have to get decked out in full full hair, full makeup, and, dressed to the nines for Death to love me and no, but maybe a little more intentionality in how, maybe brushing my teeth and brushing my hair and washing my face should be a bare minimum, right? So what's the bare minimum that you need from your spouse, one that you need to give your spouse, okay? It's not about you guys entertaining each other either. I mean, we can be really entertaining in public, and again, at home, we feel that safety to just be ourselves, which might be quieter, less humorous, less verbose, less, on public display, but we do need to show up for each other. So again, how can you communicate that to yourself in a way that helps them realize, yeah, I've slacked off. I've slacked off at home in a way that I'm still pretty vigilant and pretty intentional out in public spaces. Okay? As we wrap up, again, I just want to say, and I say this a lot, these problems are really normal, really common. If you're struggling with them, don't please don't think that your marriage is in trouble, that there's something wrong with you or your spouse. It just means that there's something worth paying attention to. And, like a garden, weeds do begin to pop up, and you want to attend to those weeds before they crowd out everything that's beautiful in your marriage. Okay. That's why I want you to reach out to me. If you got some weeds that are growing up in your marrow garden, now is the time to deal with them. Not, not when the weeds are so tall that you don't even remember what you started off with. Okay. Please tell me what resonated with you today? I would love to hear about it. Leave me a comment. Tell me which one stood out and why. And remember, if you want to have me answer any relationship questions in a future Q&A episode, my email is debbie@debbiecaudle.com. And if you're ready for something more, if you're ready to sit down with me and really talk about those weeds in your garden, debbiecaudle.com/marriage and bloom. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay teachable. Thanks for joining me.